Hello, welcome to the Elyssa webinar, Case Studies, Residencies, Peer Training, and Succession Planning, Session 3 of the 5-session series, Re-envisioning Technical Services, Identifying Leadership and Talent Management Best Practices. I'm Holly Tomrin, a member of the Elyssa Continuing Education Committee. I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenters today are Jake Nadal, Elyssa Gould, and Angela Kinney. Jake Nadal is the Executive Director of ReCap, the Research Collections and Preservation Consortium, a partnership among Columbia University, the New York Public Library, and Princeton University. Jake serves as an advisor to the National Digital Stewardship Residency Program, the Library of Congress Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Initiative. He received his BA from the University of Puget Sound and his MLS from Indiana University. Elyssa Gould serves as the Electronic Resources Librarian at the University of Tennessee and is Book Review Editor for Library Resources and Technical Services. Elyssa's professional interests are centered on bibliographic description, electronic resources, and the future of library technical services. She earned her BA at Georgia College and State University, her MSLS at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a MA in English at Northern Michigan University. Angela Kinney began working at the Library of Congress in 1981. She has served in progressively responsible positions in library services, first as a cataloging technician and now as a division chief of the African, Latin American, and Western European Division. Angela is a graduate of the Library of Congress Leadership Development Program, and she holds a BA from Georgetown University and a MLS from the Catholic University of America. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. All attendees are muted. If you have questions for Jacob, Elyssa, or Angela, please type them into the question box on your screen. Each presenter will answer questions at the end of their presentation. Our software does not have interactive chat capabilities. You may use the Elyssa hashtag if you wish to use Twitter to comment on today's presentation. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so please use the question box to submit questions and comments. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides. And now, here's Jacob. There will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out to hear us all talk to you about what we've been doing in the area of succession planning and talent management. I'm going to talk to you about some work we've done in the National Digital Stewardship Residency to help early career librarians get their work started, and then expand on that to talk about opportunities that we in technical services may have to take this model into our own work. For us, this begins with a problem. As I'm sure many of you know, I've been supervisors or recent grads during the early 2000s. Staff shortages looked inevitable at a certain point for libraries. In response to that, we had a big wave of recruitment in graduate library and information science programs. Unfortunately for us, and well beyond our control, we also had a great recession. And just as this was happening, we also saw a major change affecting the information landscape as the internet really came into its own as the dominant publication platform. Coming out of this, we saw people delaying retirements. At the same time, we had positions cut, as well as many staffing lines reallocated so that we could respond to changing technology. All reasonable things to do, but these all combined to create a situation for recent grads throughout the early 2000s where many were stuck without jobs, or very frequently graduates were finding that they had to relocate to stay in library professions, and that they often had to relocate for term-limited work that was often funded on soft money. On top of that, we're also in an era where we're seeing that we need a new generation of technical services leadership in every area of technical services, acquisitions, cataloging, my own area, preservation. There's not a robust pipeline of people available to fill mid-level and senior managerial roles. We also are trying very consciously to diversify the library. We serve a diverse audience of readers and library patrons, and we need the intellectual capabilities on our side as well to be able to meet those needs. In building a new generation of leadership, we're also recognizing that we don't just need managers, but we also need people who are inspiring experts. When we think about talent management and succession planning, it's not merely a job of filling roles with competent people, but also keeping the profession energized, especially right now as we're going through a print to digital transition, as we're looking at issues of new formats and new media literacy. We need leadership as well as competence. We also need more than just a diverse library workforce. We need diverse collections and services. We're seeing that our researchers and our readers have more and more types of materials that they want to use, and they want to work with them in more and more diverse ways. It's not simply a matter of getting a book and reading it cover to cover. We're seeing fascinating work coming out of the digital humanities and big data projects. At the same time, we're maintaining support for traditional services. The National Digital Stewardship Residency and residency programs in general benefit by treating these as constraints, not failures. So we take some big problems that we knew our graduates were facing. They had to relocate to take jobs, and that those jobs were term limited and temporarily funded. And our response was to treat them as design constraints rather than regrettable failures. That meant that we acknowledged limited resources and we focused them on particular problems. We wanted to build a professional network for these residents, and we wanted to cultivate a professional identity for them. We wanted to make sure that that professional identity was imbued with some goodwill, so that they felt that they had benefited from the opportunity to be a resident, and that their host organization, that their peers felt that they had gotten some value out of hosting this resident and working with them. This also gave us the chance to really focus on acquiring and gaining experience with a diverse set of skills and knowledge. In the case of the National Digital Stewardship Residency, that area was digital preservation. So we recognized that there were a great many organizations that needed to think about the life cycle of digital materials and needed to be thinking about and aware of the changes that were going to affect their collections in digital formats over time. They didn't necessarily have all of the homegrown internal expertise to do that. Or it may have been that they had internal expertise, but lacked the ability to actually take all of that expertise and get a project done. Bringing a new professional into that mix for a limited time with specific funding challenged these organizations to create a project and gave these residents the opportunity to focus on a project for a known period of time. That helped the organizations take some risks. They could do work that they might not be able to rationalize as core work because they had a specific project timeline, and it gave the residents something that they could take with them into their professional lives. The National Digital Stewardship Residency itself was funded by the IMLS and has its administrative home at the Library of Congress. We're now actually moving into our, finishing our third year and moving into our fourth, with independent programs in New York and Boston, as well as Washington, D.C. And this fourth year brings us an important set of programs that are distributed, so that the residents are not geographically together, but are thematically together. So we have residents now hosted by ARLIS, the Art Librarians section of the American Library Association, by the Biodiversity Heritage Libraries, and by the Association for Public Broadcasting. So here again, we're now in the very early tests with the NDSR of a residency model that doesn't have to bring everyone together in one place, but brings them together around a particular area of librarianship, something that we in technical services should pay attention to broadly. In total, in those first 3 completed years, we had 40 residents. We have about another 15 queued up with the 3 distributed programs that will be starting up soon. And with all of these, we're seeing that they graduate and they're employed in our sector, mostly libraries, but also archives, museums, and some of our professional organizations as well. So the outcomes of this have been very positive for the residents themselves. They've gotten a good first professional experience. They have colleagues and community, and they have jobs coming out of this. We've identified some critical features for what made these residencies successful. And as we think about how to support, educate, and develop the next generation of technical services leadership, I think it's worth spending some time thinking about what each one of these things means. Geography was the first element, and we started in the initial program thinking about this in pretty concrete terms. So the first National Digital Stewardship Residency cohort was in Washington, D.C., and then the subsequent cohorts were in New York and the Boston area as well. That meant it was easy for the residents to get together and talk, both formally and informally, with and without appropriate libations, depending on what the topic was. It meant also that there was a community of people around them, both in their host institutions, but also in the larger professional network that those cities bring with it, which made it easy to bring in guest speakers or guest lecturers for educational sessions. It meant they had a professional community to do outreach with. And this was important in helping them feel like they were engaged with the profession, that they were beginning to form a professional network, not just at their level, but at other levels of the profession. And it helped them build a cohort. And that cohort is important to understand as the people that they can go to for support, feedback, and encouragement. So the other residents were supportive of one another. I'm sure all of you who are mid-career or later can remember needing support in early career situations. And I hope some of the people listening are early career librarians. And I hope you're getting support now. It's important to recognize that without that, we don't create the energy that people need to grow into the profession. So building this cohort of people we saw as a really key element to making the residency a successful program. Your cohort, your peer group, can also give you a different type of feedback than your supervisors and mentors and managers can give. We felt this was important too. We're trying to help people really shape a professional identity, and that means that they need very rich and thorough feedback, and being able to hear certain things from their cohort group was important for them to recognize where they had strengths and weaknesses. Finally, the cohort was important just for encouragement. Every one of our projects, of course, had a surprise come up in it, as projects do, and having a group in your cohort will take you out for a coffee or something stronger when you need it is really important for getting through that first professional year. In addition to the peer cohort, the National Digital Stewardship Residency puts a big focus on good mentorship. So we require both a primary and secondary mentor at each site. A primary mentor who will be working with the resident on a regular, almost day-by-day basis, who's really the owner of the project, and a mentor who is someone more senior in management who is sponsoring the project within the organization. This is important for coaching and professional guidance. One of the things that the NDSR residents are learning to do is the technical work of digital preservation, but they're also just learning how to be librarians and learning how to be librarians in a professional workplace. And they're beginning to learn where the boundaries are, where it's good to push, where you need to take a step back and wait. And having a mentor who can guide you with that, talk you through both the top level work that you're trying to do, as well as all of the subtext and organizational context that grows up around libraries, is really important for helping these residents understand both their technical accomplishments as well as their own professional growth. An important part of that we learned was understanding that we were giving them projects to do and helping them shift from being students who had done assignments to being librarians with deliverables and goals they were responsible for. This was a really crucial distinction that caused us some trouble in the early parts of the residency. That residents, having come right out of library school, were used to having an assignment, a fairly concrete piece of work that could be done and graded. And as they moved into the professional world, they had projects that had deliverables and goals, but had evolutionary changes of direction, sometimes kind of clean sheet rewrites course, things that all of us as working librarians are familiar with and understand, but that's a new experience to a new professional, and having both the mentorship and the peer support to get through that and learn how to function in that way was terribly important. The final piece of the residency, and what distinguishes this from just a sort of short-term job in an important way, is that we're still thinking of this as an educational experience. So we're encouraging reflective practice, what worked and what didn't work, and taking the time to think and work with a mentor and a peer group to understand what's working well and what's not. Also built into the NDSR are several educational moments. The residents themselves go out and are expected to present and publicize their work. We begin the NDSR with a sort of immersion week or boot camp to help people have skills and really robust conceptual understanding of digital preservation. And in various ways throughout the programs, they've been interleaved with topical educational sessions or workshops that bring in experts to provide additional skills or additional guidance. So we think of this, we sometimes jokingly call it the mini med school model, that you've got your degree, you have your credential, but now we're going to put you into a educational teaching environment where we really hone your skills, to help you get from the classroom to being a full-fledged practitioner. With all those similarities, we're seeing valuable differences as well. So the scheduling and types of continuing education, whether that's done upfront or spaced throughout the term of the residency, the exact size and composition of the cohort, how many people need to be there. We're now beginning to look at how much in-person and online interaction is necessary or possible. And the nature and the scope of the projects themselves, of course, can bring a lot of diversity to a particular cohort. Notably, with the new distance residencies that are being tried this year, we're also looking to the regional professional chapters to provide some of the benefits that we previously looked to a city to provide. So in Arliss, for example, we will have residents in Philadelphia, New Haven, and Minneapolis, and the regional Arliss chapters are sort of on call to make sure that there are art librarians available to the residents in those areas to provide them guidance. So we're seeing ways that this model can, having worked in one fashion, now become more flexible. This is also, I think it's important to say, very rich ground for cultivating diversity in our profession. So outside of the NDSR, other similarly structured programs have looked at residencies as ways specifically to bring diversity into organizations, either bringing in language skills, cultural competencies, technical or intellectual competencies, and creating a way for the organization to declare those to be important, to bring those skills and competencies into the organization in a way that gives them the additional support that they need to become part of the organizational culture and have traction, and to help people, especially people who are coming from underprivileged backgrounds who are facing economic hardships, have the fiscal support required to make a relocation worthwhile, so that it's not just a move for a job, but it's a move for an important pre-professional experience that builds a supportive network around a person or a particular set of skills and ideas. The ugly fear that we have to deal with is that diversity will somehow be a distraction from what libraries are trying to do. And I think the smart reality is to recognize that diversity is a mean to an end, that throughout this our goal has remained pretty much the same, which is every reader their book and every book its reader. And to accomplish that, it's not only who we employ, it's what we collect and how we make collections accessible. And for us in technical services especially, that means having the language skills, the cultural competencies, and the specialist abilities required to fulfill our mission. In my own organization, ReCap, we work with major research libraries to preserve and make available a shared collection of over 10 million items in over 400 languages. The cultural diversity and intellectual diversity required just to catalog that material alone is staggering. And I think there's an important lesson for us in technical services that we have some really rich terrain available for us in helping libraries and helping our parent organizations diversify both in who we employ as well as the skills and types of materials that are available to our researchers. To move from the NDSR framework into technical services, I'd encourage us to think about a few things. One is to recognize that technical services needs people who can excel as specialists outside the administrative ladder. And this bears a little bit of attention. In my own area of technical services, preservation, of course, some of the most important parts of any preservation division are conservators who may have very particular skills that are both scientific and craft-based. And an excellent conservator needs to be able to spend a great deal of time on bench, just as an expert cataloger needs to be able to spend a great deal of time describing the materials. So there's a track within technical services that is not administrative, where career advancement has nothing to do with supervising more and more people or overseeing more and more departmental functions. That is also a way that we bring a diverse set of skills, knowledge, and expertise to bear on our collections. In preservation, in research libraries that I've worked with, one of the great challenges has often been that we collect a broader range of materials from a wide array of cultures, and understanding those different paper and printing technologies, understanding the languages, and understanding the context of creation of materials is a real challenge, and preservation can become an important area where the library connects to the larger intellectual life of, in our case, the university, or at least in my case, the university. But also, I think where we can see technical services, whether that's acquisitions and forming functional business partnerships with a diverse array of constituents, or cataloging and having the cultural and intellectual competency to understand and describe materials, or preservation, where we're understanding the material culture of a number of different cultures. We're an important locus for diversity in the library and our parent organizations. Residencies are a great way to introduce people to technical services and entice them to stay. So providing a resident cohort means that people have support, and that we don't make the mistake of creating an isolated diversity candidate, but instead that we bring diversity in to our organizations in a way that values and supports that effort. The projects themselves that are undertaken and the way that the institution is involved signals the importance of that work, and in technical services helps remind everyone in the library of the critical functions that technical services plays in the library's success. A cohort-based model is also important for helping people get engaged in the profession, so that they are interested in working in and staying in technical services, and also helping them explore their potential for leadership. One of the things we've seen in the residency programs is, of course, that people start flourishing, and that leaders emerge amongst these cohorts. So as I head towards wrapping up, I think my challenge to all of you, especially mid and senior career technical services librarians, is in some ways to stop working and start teaching. We have a growing need for a new generation of technical services librarians, and we also need that new generation of tech services librarians to bring a rich array of skills and perspectives to our work. And I think one of the most important things we can do now is invite those people in and create the programs that will help them flourish early in their careers. With that, I'm going to say thank you, and I think I'm about on time here, so we have a few minutes to hand it over to all of you for questions.
Thank you, Joseph, for such great information about residency programs. So we do have time for questions. I encourage all of you to submit questions and comments using the question box. We do have a few questions to start with. So regarding your challenge to expert technical services staff to stop working and start teaching, how are the responsibilities and time commitment for those experts and mentors adjusted so that they were able to take on those teaching roles?
Sure. So it's worth saying with the NDSR itself, of course, there's a substantial piece of outside funding that makes this a compelling value proposition for everybody. Absent that, I will, rather than generalize, speak to my own experience, right? And that one of the lessons that was hard for me to learn as a teacher and mentor to early career librarians, and something that we saw play out in the residency as well, was that mentors have to be ready to let their residents fail. That if you're putting in the same number of hours as your resident, it means your resident is not having the experience of figuring things out for themselves. And once you learn that and recognize that even in a standard 110-hour library school internship, if you plan 20 hours of instruction, 20 hours of terrible work as they learn how they're going to do something, you still come out with 60 or 70 hours of extra work that wouldn't have gotten done. And that takes, for us as teachers, I think, a little bit of perspective as we bring people in. The other piece here is just to recognize that as we start training early career people and helping them find their own feet, that we have to move away from a notion of merely being efficient and productive. Part of our goal is to make the profession resilient. We have to accept that as new people start, they work inefficiently, and meanwhile it looks like we're working inefficiently. And so you have to take and have to work in an organization that can take a little longer view than merely what got done this week or this month, and recognize that that the payoff really comes in a quarter, a year, or a season.
Great, that's really good advice. How long is a typical residency, and what are some specific examples of the types of projects that are a good fit for a resident?
Yeah, so the NDSR has been 9 to 12 months, and we're more and more encouraging and almost insisting that we end up at 12 months. We've also, when we were developing the program, we benchmarked a lot of other professions, early career or immediate postgraduate placements, and those are often 2-year placements, right? So I think longer is better, and this may help to sort of underscore what I was just saying about the payoff for this type of investment is over a time period, right? That the first month often feels really bad, and just like improving your performance and anything, if you learn to do it gets worse or gets better. Having that preparation is important. That said, we've seen also some really interesting programs that, for example, part-time over an extended period of time, so that someone, sounds like my is reconnecting my background.
Jake, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment. We're having some trouble with your audio.
Am I back now?
Yeah, Jake, I'm sorry. Your audio is breaking up. What I think we'll do is if we have any other questions that come in, Jake will be able to answer those offline, and we'll get those answers to everybody that attended today. But thanks again, Jake. And now we're going to switch to our next presenter, Elyssa. So there'll be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elyssa Gould, and I am the Electronic Resources Librarian at the University of Tennessee. I wanted to say thank you for attending today, and I'm honored to be included as a speaker in our webinar. I was specifically asked to speak about peer training, and as I thought about this topic, I realized that peer training is essentially acknowledging your knowledge of something and sharing it with others while working towards a common workplace goal. I also consider peer training to be more of a grassroots informal effort that you can use to encourage your colleagues, creatively problem solve, and share that knowledge with one another. It's a way that everyone, no matter what your level is in your organization, to receive some development. And it sits kind of between the onboarding programs like diversity programs and resident programs, as Jake described, and in between formal succession planning that Angela will talk about. It's kind of a nice in-between of all of these programs. So why is peer training important? And why is it included in this series on leadership and talent management? Think about this. We spend more time doing the tasks in our job descriptions and discussing work issues with our colleagues than we do in formalized training programs. How many of us have been frustrated with a situation? Say a process isn't going how you'd like, or you can't figure out how to solve a problem. You step away for a few minutes, discuss your issue with your colleague, and all of a sudden you have an idea of how to resolve that problem. That is a part of peer training. I believe this peer training is important because it's not only the lowest cost way of training in a workplace, it's also the most natural form of training. It's a genuine outgrowth of our desires to learn and improve, and I think in libraries you'll find that a lot of us really want to learn and improve. It's also how we try new things and expose ourselves to new viewpoints and just grow as individuals. In this desire to learn and grow, we also have to know ourselves, our strengths and our weaknesses, and our habits and our motivations. For example, have any of you taken the StrengthsFinder quiz by Tom Roth? I took that quiz through one of my university's HR development courses and realized that I have some strengths in input, connectedness, and harmony. And as I thought about these results, I realized that my natural strengths had led me to jobs that banked on my ability to collaborate and discuss with others. And then also my professional service and scholarship opportunities also relied on these strengths. And when I thought about the times I participated in peer training, for me, collaboration and using these strengths is key. So I think it would be helpful to take some time and think about yourself and go through a quiz or two, observe your habits for a week, and discover how peer training would be a natural fit in your own strengths, not to make it fit someone else's, but to fit your own. So then how do you get to a point where A, you're willing to share what you know, and B, you're confident that you're sharing in the appropriate forum? In short, I think the answer is jump in and do it. Jump in and share anyway. I think you'll find you're probably already participating in several kinds of peer training, and if you're already doing that, those are the correct places to do so. I'd like to share some experiences that I've had throughout the first 5 years of my career that will help us identify some do's and some don'ts for peer training. I found that the characteristics of peer training seem to be a willingness to share knowledge or learn from one another, and it's also influenced by some sort of formal or informal relationship with others. Also, the knowledge is applied almost immediately via a formal or informal event with other people. So my first position was at Northern Michigan University, where I was tasked with recreating the catalog librarian position to include providing metadata for archival materials. I balanced my time between the library and the archives, figured out ways to include archival materials in the library catalog, and regularly worked with my colleagues and student employees to make sure that my efforts lined up with those of those two units. It was at this job where I experienced the peer training of mentorship. I was assigned to a wonderful librarian as a formal mentor who encouraged a conversation where I could learn from her and she could also learn from me. We discussed annual evaluations, promotion and tenure requirements, identified development opportunities for me, dissected the nuances of workplace politics, and also discussed the things that we wished were different at our library. And it was out of this last discussion that we discovered we could move beyond the peer training of just the two of us to a larger training for our entire library. We had noticed a general concern that the student and employees in the library didn't seem to be trained to the same level of customer service throughout the different units in the library. So with our dean's blessing, we held a casual coffee talk where we invited our colleagues to share their successes and struggles with teaching student employees to share our customer service values. While I hope that our colleagues did not just attend for the free food we provided, we had a good turnout and lively discussion. Everyone seemed to leave the coffee talk feeling reinvigorated. The group even wrote a customer service agreement that each unit in the library agreed to train and hold the student employees accountable to. We held another coffee talk on another timely topic the following semester, and then passed the organizing and hosting to 2 other colleagues to let them share their ideas to make sure it was a real community effort. I've also had a number of informal mentors throughout my career. Many of these grew out of my involvement with Elyssa. Through each group or event I've been involved with, there has been at least one individual that I've looked up to and felt comfortable enough to ask questions or advice from later on, whether it's career advice, cataloging help, or how to manage a workplace situation. I found that by opening up the conversation stream, some of these individuals have come back to me for advice from a younger career person or to ask how something is done at my institution. By making connections through Elyssa, I've had the chance to gain many informal peer training experiences as well as contribute to others. And if you're listening to this and think that you don't have someone at your institution to provide this kind of mentorship, you are in luck. Elyssa is beginning a new formal mentoring program this year. There's the URL on the screen that you can follow to find out more information. And don't be scared by my use of the word formal. It's really just a 1-year commitment. No in-person meeting is required, and how you and your mentor operate the mentorship is largely up to the 2 of you and your needs. Also, if you're listening and you have some experience to share with a newer colleague, I really encourage you to sign up to be a mentor. Applications are due next month on March 17th. So what I learned at my first job was that I was really a valued part of my team. Despite feeling like my younger age and lack of expertise might be barriers, my colleagues were really eager to learn from me. They wanted to hear what I'd learned in school or heard my friends experiencing in their new jobs. They're excited to have a fresh set of eyes look at their systems and processes and ask that ultimate question, why? While I was fortunate to be in a workplace that expressed these things, I realize not everyone has had the same experience, and I wanted to offer some encouragement to remember that no matter where we are in our workplaces, we can always offer up peer training up the food chain, down the food chain, and across the food chain, and it's always significant. It might not be acknowledged as being valued, but it really is valuable, so please offer that peer training whenever it comes up. Now, fast forwarding a few years, I moved on to my second position at the University of Michigan Law Library. And there I was again kind of creating my own position. This time I took electronic resource tasks from 4 different units, put them in my control so that one individual controlled the entire electronic resource lifecycle, from acquisition to description and statistics to solving outage issues. You can imagine that by taking tasks from 4 different units, I had to do a lot of collaborating to make sure that no task had been left behind or forgotten. An unexpected plus of having my hand in so many units was that I became more closely acquainted with the work of my colleagues than most of my colleagues could ever know themselves. In my first weeks, I went to all the reference librarians to ask what they needed from the electronic resources librarian. By doing this, I was able to open a communication stream that lasted throughout my time at the law library. I essentially became a conduit of information by facilitating discussions between disparate units and connecting each person's understanding with all of our various processes. For example, reference librarians would often come to me with requests for information on new databases or journals. Because of my interaction with their cataloging unit, I could also answer their questions about how that unit would handle the descriptive access to these electronic resources in question. And also because of my place in the acquisitions unit, I could answer how quickly an electronic resource could be paid and made accessible. Eventually, I came to know my coworkers' strengths so well that I could also point colleagues to staff members with specific skills for use in problem solving or in various projects. I hope that my sharing of processes and skills helped each of my colleagues better understand how our library could work together to provide access to resources. I also worked on a project at this institution that felt a little bit like guerrilla peer training. So let me explain. Our library was becoming aware of the increasing cost of electronic resources and looked to be on the brink of beginning a weeding project for electronic resources. I was asked to prepare a report of the electronic resources and their cost. And then I went one step further and included the usage statistics for the past 3 years, as well as calculated the cost per use of each resource. And that alone helped to open a whole new dialogue with all of our selectors. Even though I had been providing usage statistics upon request over time, and with the renewal information these selectors saw each year, the selectors kind of seemed to ignore that information, and so I took the requested report as that opportunity to educate my colleagues on what was recorded as usage statistics and how it could be helpful in making weeding decisions, while also showing them the entire picture of our electronic resources and their cost. While this approach may not work in every workplace, it opened some discussions and made obvious which electronic resources we were getting our money's worth and which were essentially a waste of that money. The statistics provided a clear argument for canceling several no or low-use electronic resources, which we did. Now, my current position at the University of Tennessee again has me serving as the role of ambassador of electronic resources, activating resources, resolving access issues, and problem solving with my staff, vendors, IT administrators, internal stakeholders, and patrons. I'm currently applying my creative problem solving to finding better ways of communicating problems and solutions with the various stakeholders who use our electronic resources. While I am new in this position, I have already experienced much peer training with my kind colleagues who have walked me through new-to-me systems, technologies, and procedures. And even by asking questions while learning something that's new to me, asking why, I can help those long-term staff think through processes in a new light, and we can have a peer training exchange. Now, different opportunities exist in professional organizations for peer training than you can find in your own job. In one way, the stakes are lowered and some divisions, like those created by your job title, don't really exist anymore in a professional organization. I've really found a home in Elyssa for professional service. I got started with the Elyssa New Members Interest Group, a group that works with other Elyssa groups to help pass along ideas for member recruitment, engagement, and retention. It's been a great place to see how other committees work while simultaneously having a voice in Elyssa. I like to say that I've met all of my Elyssa friends through the New Members Interest Group. They're the individuals that I room with at conferences and share meals with and email with questions or pleas for advice. The Elyssa New Members Interest Group leans heavily on peer training to acclimate new librarians to the Elyssa organization. The group hosts regular chats via Twitter that connect veterans with new members over topics of mutual interest, organizes meetings at ALA conferences that help new members meet other Elyssa members, and recently had a hand in developing the Elyssa Mentorship program I mentioned earlier. Out of my professional organization has grown the ultimate peer training experience, a network of colleagues that I call my friends, who answer my emails and the texts when I have questions about library systems, new products, and workflows, and I'm happy to do the same for them. So to connect peer training back to our series topic of identifying leadership and talent management, I reflected on how I felt as an individual about my peer training opportunities through the years at my different organizations. I definitely felt valued when someone would ask for my help in understanding something, like why is RDA important? When I was able to facilitate discussions between colleagues as we worked towards improvement in our work, I felt a stronger attachment to that workplace and its goals. When I had people to turn to, I felt like I was able to fill the gaps in my knowledge that formal training just couldn't fill. Only people with real experience could help me. Through peer training other people, I've been able to gain my own leadership skills as well as improve my communication skills. All in all, I feel like it's made me a better librarian and a better citizen of my workplace. And so I really hope that those of you who have a leadership or a management role at your institution can help foster this kind of environment to support peer training. In conclusion, I've learned that peer training really comes out of the most unlikely sources. It requires a genuine willingness to share with and learn from others without expecting anything in return. I feel like this is the most important characteristic, as it often opens up the door for future conversations. I've learned that one peer training relationship can lead to other fruitful outcomes, like an invitation to serve on a committee or partner on writing an article. You don't really know where peer training will take you. I've also learned that collaboration with others and advocacy for your areas of expertise are key. It's really up to you to stand up for your knowledge and what you believe is important for others to learn, like I did with the usage statistics. And also, I've learned that there's no one shape that peer training can take. It takes all forms. It can be that formal mentoring relationship, it can be a one-time exchange of knowledge, or it can be a long-term relationship where you go back and forth sharing what you've learned over many years. I hope my talk today shows you some ways that you may already be involved in peer training and gives you some ideas for participation in new ways. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And next I'm going to answer some audience questions if Holly has any for us to answer.
Hey, thank you, Elyssa, for such an interesting presentation about peer training programs. So again, if you have questions for Elyssa, please enter them into the question box. We do have a few questions to get started. Do you have suggestions for institutions that would like to implement a formal peer training program, or how to move an informal program into a more formal program?
I think I'll start by talking about an informal one into a formal one because that sounds a little bit easier to manage. You might need to survey your employees to see what is going on informally and to see what kind of shapes they're taking. Like if you have people meeting one-on-one regularly in some sort of mentorship, or if you have folks who are regularly learning together, like say you have 2 units that regularly meet to exchange ideas. It would be good to know about those opportunities, and you could either just put your rubber stamp on them to say, yes, this is great, continue this. You could try and see where knowledge is overlapping in your institution and maybe needs to be shared some more. I know like my group that I'm in right now is called Acquisitions and Continuing Resources, and we have a regular meeting with our cataloging unit to make sure that we're exchanging ideas and knowing the issues that are going on. And often we know a piece of the puzzle that someone doesn't, and so it's really great to have a monthly meeting just to chat about those things together. So I think finding out what's already going on and encouraging others to participate is a great way to make it formal. And kind of the same thing goes for if you don't have anything formal going on yet, is to see those areas of potential overlap and maybe going to some leaders in those areas and asking them if they would consider starting something or if they have any ideas on how to start something. I think things always work better when you run with some ideas that individuals have instead of the ideas of leadership. It creates more ownership, and I think I would start there.
Great. Can you give some examples of the types of projects, skills, or activities that are a good fit for a peer training program?
I think really wherever you're finding that some knowledge is lacking, often something that comes up for me is solving electronic resource outage issues. There's so many different areas to think about when you're trying to figure out what's going wrong with an electronic resource, and a great way for me is to talk to the circulation desk and the reference desk employees to see what issues they're seeing and what problems they're having, and helping them understand like where to start and then what's the line where I need to take over and solve something because it involves going to a vendor or creating a technical solution. So I think if you know where some overlap areas are, I keep going back to overlap, but I think there's a lot of that in the library, and if you can find those areas, those would be great ones to start with and see how those peer training experiences go.
Great. In terms of peer training opportunities that might happen across different units of the library, do you have any experience or stories about how to make that sustainable, so it's not necessarily just a one-time thing that a person learns and then they go back to their regular job, but is there any sort of ongoing role for that person once they've sort of learned a skill or in an area that's sort of outside of their regular unit?
Definitely. We have an experience of that here at the University of Tennessee, where our interlibrary loan office is a little bit short-staffed on Mondays, and so they took the initiative to ask for some help, and they trained a bunch of folks in acquisitions on how to do interlibrary loan tasks. And so there's like a rotating schedule of every Monday, one person from acquisitions goes down to help interlibrary loan, and they get to practice that knowledge that they learned weeks and weeks ago, and they get to come back and do it in person. I think finding ways to make it stick through experiences on a regular basis means that knowledge will become more ingrained and less likely to be forgotten. You really don't want to take the time to teach someone something just to have them forget it 5 minutes later. So if you have any sort of activity or a group that needs some help that could use regular help, then that's a really great way to learn something new and also apply it on a regular basis.
Thank you. That's really good advice. In terms of sort of the guerrilla training that you sort of mentioned, do you have any suggestions for people, if they have an idea like that, ways to go through sort of proper channels, or just go ahead and do it? Or what are some of your advice around sort of pursuing those sort of guerrilla ideas?
I think definitely knowing the people in your workplace is really key to knowing how something like that would go over. What I didn't mention was that I knew that our director wasn't a huge fan of surprises in meetings, and so I had set up a meeting with her one-on-one to show her the report that I had made and explain why I did it the way I did. And she had no problem with it, I think, because I set up that one-on-one time before I showed it at the whole meeting. And so that way it made more sense, I think, in the whole big picture, because I had already spent a lot more time talking her through it than I did with all of the selectors at once. So I think, where I said know yourself, you also need to know your workplace. And if you don't, like I'm relatively new at my current job, then I would need to ask around and ask some opinions of how to make things happen at that one institution instead of just going forward with something. So I think sometimes when you're newer, you can get away with some stuff, and also when you've been around for a long time and know people really well, that's a good time to also have those guerrilla tactics, I guess.
Great. Okay, well, we have time for one more question. Towards the beginning, you mentioned how helpful sort of different kinds of personality tests might be for this process. Do you have any advice or stories to share about a library or an organization, engaging in that kind of activity together and then turning the results into some kind of program?
I haven't actually seen that done collectively, but I think it would be a really good idea. And something you'd have to think about too would be whether those people participating would be comfortable sharing their results. I know that some people maybe view that more as a personal thing than as a group activity, but if you maybe were a supervisor of a unit and you talked to everyone in advance and said, I'd like to do this as a team building exercise, I think if everyone agrees, I think that could be a great way to kind of understand each other and how you can work together better to learn from one another and also share with each other. So I'd say proceed a little bit with caution on that, but I think it's a great thing to pursue, and I really do think it'd be beneficial.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elyssa. We're going to now move on to our next presenter, Angela. And then again, if anyone has more questions for Elyssa that you think of later, Elyssa can answer those offline and we can send those out later. So there'll be a slight delay as we change presenters to Angela.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Kinney, and I'm Chief of the African, Latin American, and Western European Division at Library of Congress. And my division is responsible for both acquisitions and cataloging in Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Western Europe, or what I call half the world. I'll be speaking about my experiences of having participated in and assisted with a major reorganization of my directorate. And I'll also be talking about the importance of demonstrating good leadership through strategic and succession planning, and how by doing so, as a manager, we empower employees while at the same time bringing in good talent into our organization. What I'm going to describe today is my directorate's experience with its reorganization and how we use strategic planning techniques to achieve efficiencies and to make change and address resource needs, while at the same time getting buy-in from the staff I also plan to talk about our responsibilities as managers to mentor, train, and to provide counsel to employees. I really believe this is especially important during times of limited resources and great change. Uh, in my opinion, one of the greatest challenges that we as managers face nowadays in technical services is a decreasing workforce, which challenges our ability to innovate and lead effectively. When I started at Elyssa in 1981, sounds like so long ago, we had 5,500 staffers, and now we have 3,200. And although we have really done a lot in terms of automating our processes, our workloads have increased significantly as we've lost staff to attrition. The Library of Congress is a U.S. legislative agency, and so we have a responsibility to balance our responsibility to serve the U.S. Congress as the de facto national library and also meet the research needs of the American public. And the way we've been able to do that is to maintain that balance through strategic planning. So I'm going to talk about the 2008 reorganization of what is now known as the Acquisitions and Bibliographic Access Directorate, or a BA Directorate as we call it here. And this is really a perfect example of how we at the library brought about efficiencies as we lost staff. So this is a case study of how we combined two directorates, one for cataloging and the other for acquisitions, into one and continue to operate effectively. We began in 2016 by looking at different operational models to determine the changes that we needed to make to deal with staffing losses and increased work. At that time, I was working in the cataloging directorate, and I was managing a division of 120 staff, and we had about 88,000 materials and monographs mostly that we had not gotten to cataloging. But we had created a whole book cataloging project that had been pretty successful in our directorate, where staff were taught to do cataloging from start to finish. But as managers began to look at the possibility of peer professionals and professionals learning both acquisitions and cataloging for analog and digital materials, we looked at the possibility also of our staff doing cataloging for all subjects in order to speed up the throughput of our work on hand. This was a model that we had never implemented at the Library of Congress because prior to that, staff had very unique and separated duties. So what we started out doing was to examine the impact on working conditions and our work locations, the staff that we had left from attrition, our overall operations, and we decided it was worth a risk to move forward with the reorganization. So here I'm showing you some of the things that we learned, or that I really want you to take away from this presentation. Hopefully you'll find these learning objectives helpful in the event that you ever are faced with coordinating a major reorganization or a realignment at your institution. Here I'm offering some practical approaches that my colleagues and I took to planning the reorg. For example, each division chief was asked to serve as a committee chair for a major area where we wanted to affect change. We had leads for moving work on hand to new divisions. I was responsible for that area, moving 600,000 items to new divisions. We had chief in charge of reassigning staff to new position descriptions, creating new division scope statements, and placing staff in divisions where their skills were best utilized. I'm going to also go over some of the recommended ways in which we assisted staff members to progress in their careers as we reorganize, and I'll talk about some of the offices and programs at LCE that aid managers to train employees to do their work, provide career enhancement, and to get experience both inside of ELSI and at other organizations. These programs are really important because our staff juggle work schedules that include personal issues such as child care and caring for the elderly or special needs family members. ELSI also has programs that support managers. And as we brought about change over the years, we've had training as managers in facilitative and consultative management through our Human Resources Services Office. We also have an online learning center for staff and managers to register for formal classroom and online training. So this is the change management model that reflects the techniques my directorate found most useful in strategic planning during the reorganization. In 2 years, we used this system to narrow down 14 divisions into 9. Our goal was to increase production through cross-training our staff to perform multiple duties. You can imagine that this message didn't go over well with our staff initially because what we were essentially asking them to do was to make huge changes when we were actually losing a lot of staff and pretty fast. But I think we realized that it was for that very reason that we had to realign. We had to streamline our operations so that we could eliminate a lot of the redundancies that we had in place, and hopefully by doing so we could increase production. We used those 2 years to accomplish several goals. We assessed our work on hand in our directorate through a staff survey. We wanted to find out the total amount of work on hand that each division held, determine the formats of materials that needed to be processed, and the stage of processing that needed to be performed. We were able to determine which divisions had the majority of the work on hand, and we used that information to develop cataloging projects that processed 10,000 titles before we actually reorganized. We also did a staff foreign language survey, asking our colleagues the languages that they spoke, what foreign languages they read, and what foreign languages or English they used to acquire and catalog materials, and the formats of materials that they had expertise in acquiring and cataloging. We also asked what type of information technology and training experience they had based on those responses, we were able to assign staff to training assignments and to the divisions where their skills were best utilized. Ultimately, we used those surveys to redesign and restructure our operations to create smaller and more well-functioning sections within our divisions. Here I'm showing the first steps we took in the planning process to prepare for the reorganization. We aligned our strategic planning efforts with those of the Library of Congress strategic plan. ELSI prioritizes its strategic planning efforts by identifying annual program performance planning goals. We call them APGs. And we also identify strategies and targets, and we send those quarterly progress reports to Congress, and those reports of our targets and where we are with those support our fiscal year funding requests. Well, during this period, we really tried to step up our program planning efforts to identify goals that would increase congressional support. And some of those goals we identified were to maximize our acquisitions and cataloging efforts, increase publisher involvement in our cataloging and publication program, and to train staff in their knowledge of the digital life cycle. We began partnering and sharing information with other institutions outside of ELSI to learn what they had learned about cost-saving efforts and how they reduced costs and automated their operations. And so we began to adjust our operations so that staff could perform multiple duties instead of just one task. We cross-trained our staff to perform acquisitions and cataloging, so that they could catalog multiple formats and provide subject cataloging and classification in all subjects. We sought out publishers and vendors and asked that they provide more automated cataloging metadata that our staff now use to complete cataloging records. And we made these changes to, as we made these changes, we saw that we had increased our efficiencies. Items were acquired, catalog bound, and shelved faster because there was less handling. We also increased outsourcing of shelf-ready cataloging to vendors to reduce work on hand. And, we realized that this involved an investment in startup costs, but the overall benefits of outsourcing really drove down the cost of cataloging for us and the amount of our work on hand. We also recruited volunteers who were former staff who had retired so that we could realize additional cost savings because we didn't have to train annuitants to perform acquisitions and cataloging. Our long-term goal was to get our staff cross-trained in acquisitions and cataloging and really drive down our work on hand so that we were able to do that. Nearly all of the staff in the directorate are now performing acquisitions and cataloging duties, and our work on hand is half of what it was back in 2006. Another long-term goal we had was to fill behind our staff that we lost to retirement. And fortunately, we've received support to hire first-line supervisors and chiefs who retired since 2006 and to hire 30 rank-and-file staff members over the past 2 years. Our short-term goals were to move staff to their new work locations along with the work on hand, which we were able to do in a matter of a few months. We also began renovating our work areas, and that increased a lot of enthusiasm for the reorganization. So here are some of the ways that we went about preparing for the realignment. We created multiple learning pathways so that staff could have the skills needed to perform their jobs. We increased classroom training in cataloging, acquisitions, and information technology. Beginning in 2011, our training office created a major subject cataloging curriculum, and all staff who cataloged, whether they were paraprofessionals or professionals, were required to attend training in the classroom. Librarians were also offered optional subject cataloging training for topical areas where they needed some assistance in subject cataloging. Our cataloging staff who were being cross-trained into acquisitions also had to attend mandatory acquisitions classroom training that we offered. And we started setting up areas in the library to use new technology. For instance, we started creating webinars, and we use Skype, iCohere, and GoToMeeting to provide distance learning to our staff who are working in our 6 overseas offices in India, Indonesia, Brazil, Kenya, Egypt, and Pakistan. And many of those offices now perform shelf-ready cataloging. So as we stepped into testing and implementation of RDA between 2012 and 2013, we asked staff in our divisions to serve as RDA testers and trainers and to train colleagues in both acquisitions and RDA cataloging in both a formal classroom environment as well as within divisions. We paired senior staffers with junior staffers to receive one-on-one training and mentoring, and we increased our training efforts overall and opportunities for less experienced staffers to attend off-site training and professional conferences. As you know, the library's been critiqued for being behind the times in our ability to be current in our technology, and I think we've significantly stepped up our efforts to train our staff in managing technology and in acquiring and cataloging electronic resources. And we did that by rotating our staff, most recently over the past few years, into details to learn to acquire and catalog e-resources and to increase their knowledge about the digital life cycle of electronic resources. Many more of our staff now know how to acquire e-books and e-serials, and they know how to create cataloging records in our electronic resources management system and in the library's ILS. These are some of the best practices that work well for us to build cohesive teams and to empower our staff to assist us with the reorganization. As I mentioned, we created transition teams that included staff at all levels of the directorate and also from the library's labor organizations. Um, and that created more staff support for the reorg and the planning process. We received the feedback from staff at all levels, and that input guided the reorganization and enabled us to adjust our operations as we planned. So it really calmed the staff concerns because we were able to deal with difficult situations as they arose. Within the teams, we did the things that I mentioned before, rewriting all the PDs, drafting the scope statements, reassigning staff to new divisions, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've ever done any of these things, you know it takes countless hours to accomplish this task, but having the staff as well as the managers and the labor organizations present to help us map our way through making these changes was really empowering to everyone. We felt that we had a stake in making the reorganization a success because it was our work that would be judged in the future as to whether the realignment was a success. And we also spoke at professional conferences about our reorganization and modeled our best practices of other reorganizations after other reorganizations that had gone through this before us. Our directors and managers at our institutions talked to directors and managers of other institutions and their staff, and they were really generous in sharing their successes and challenges and the progress or problems they had and reorganized. And ultimately, we learned the importance of teamwork, that you have to have good teams when you're restructuring a large operation. And we also learned that providing clarity and transparency in everything we did as we went along, we communicated each step of the reorganization through email and by posting documentation, which we still have on our directorate's internet site. So we realized that doing that was really important to the staff and that we really had to be clear to them as we went along with each and every step of our reorganization. So by 2008, we were reorganized and we had staff moved to swing space during our renovations, but we're turning to the permanent space with new carpeting and newly painted walls and new cubicles was really well worth it, and it was really appreciated by everyone. Things seem to be turning back to normal, or so we thought. Just as we were settling into our new positions, the library announced that it would institute an early retirement program. Well, it was the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, which is invoked by all federal agencies when they wish to do so. VERA is a program that allows federal employees that are reorganizing to offer early outs rather than lay employees off through a reduction in force. Well, by instituting VERA, we lost a lot of staff. We hadn't anticipated losing, but we regrouped and we prepared ourselves again strategically. Also in 2012, LC announced that it would implement RDA, and you can imagine the varied reactions of our staff when we told them that they had to attend mandatory RDA training, which basically consisted of 4 to 44 hours of classroom instruction. Of course, the library wanted to lead RDA implementation with the National Agricultural Library and the National Library of Medicine as we moved from using ASR 2 to RDA guidelines, and we were able to do that successfully within a year, but it was at a cost of losing more of our staff. These then were some of the lessons that we learned from the reorganization and some of the changes that we had to make as a result of VERA and RDA implementation. We had to balance staff expectations of what they were being asked to do vis-a-vis our institutional mandates, these new mandates for VERA and RDA. Needless to say, we experienced some pushback initially, but we eventually adjusted to the staffing losses and we were able to, get a lot of buy-in from the staff. And as we involved staff as RDA testers, they began to acquire more digital materials, and they began to understand why we wanted to implement RDA guidelines, because it allowed us the ability to catalog formats beyond just the books that we were dealing with, books and other special materials. So our managers became also proactive and not just reactive to change. We did that by incorporating succession planning into our strategic planning efforts so that we could anticipate expected staff losses. And we involved the staff in that succession planning process so that we carefully judge when to make decisions unilaterally, and we also looked at when we needed to convene working groups to assist in the decision-making process. By using this approach, we created a sense of ownership of the outcomes of our actions. We recognized our staff accomplishments, and we also learned to respect generational differences in opinions and in work ethics. It became increasingly important that we spend more time listening and coaching staff left behind after their colleagues retired. And as we coached what essentially were many younger staffers, we realized that what might motivate us as baby boomers is oftentimes different from the professional aspirations of millennials and Generation Xers. So these are some of the techniques that we continue to use to motivate staff, especially during times of great change. We have always tried to remain positive throughout all of our challenges, and we have always been communicative and tried to be accountable as managers. My colleagues and I never wavered in our quest to complete the reorganization, despite those staffing losses and the other challenges that we had along the way. We created staff sharing arrangements instead and reassigned staff to new divisions if they could justify that their placement in their new division was not a good fit for their skills. I think we can count as our success story that since the reorganization, many of the staff have been promoted to supervisory positions as they gained experience in these other divisions, and paraprofessionals have progressed to professional positions. Because we had less staff, supervisors also trained staff in other duties within their position descriptions that they hadn't performed before, and that in turn fostered better work ethics and inspired our staff members with confidence that we had faith in their skills to accomplish the work that we gave them. And by recognizing their achievements, not just with monetary rewards, but by speaking about their accomplishments publicly, we increased overall goodwill. And fortunately, over the past 2 years, as I mentioned before, we've recruited new staff through positions we open to the general public, and we continue to want to do that. That capability has allowed us to recruit high caliber and diverse employees with foreign language skills, information technology expertise, and area studies skills that we really, really need here at the Library of Congress. And we did so using the library's merit selection system, which guarantees equal employment opportunity in the hiring process. We also took time to listen and to guide staff in their professional development and in achieving their goals. We tried to take advantage of programs which offer assistance to employees in managing their work day. For instance, the library has programs for using advanced sick leave, the leave bank, and the leave transfer program. For the latter two programs, the annual leave is donated by staff members that can be used by employees in times of crisis. And we increased our efforts to provide career enhancement opportunities for employees through different programs that I'm going to show you now. So this is just a sampling of the professional opportunities that we offer to staff in the Library of Congress. The telework program, our staff telework, and it's been a very successful program that's demonstrated that our staff can work off-site and be productive. It's improved the library's ability to recruit and retain employees. It saves our staff on commuting costs and decreases traffic congestion because it's pretty crowded in the Washington, D.C. area. The Future Bridge program is a mentoring and professional program. This pairs non-supervisory staff members with supervisors to hone their skills. They learn about the library, build new professional relationships, and they increase their institutional interactions. The Leadership Development Program, which I'm a product of, is for professional staff. It provides opportunities for staff of diverse backgrounds to participate in developmental experiences in administrative positions. Staff can participate in educational training and skill building experiences to build their expertise and prepare them for competing as supervisors or to just return to their former positions to exercise leadership in a non-supervisory manner. And then the Career Development Program is for our paraprofessionals. This enhances their professional development, leadership skills, and the knowledge of the Library of Congress and its major programs and initiatives. The library also has a selective placement program that provides opportunities for those with special needs to be considered for non-competitive permanent hire. And there are also a myriad of other fellowships and internships at the library, which allow members of the public and staff to volunteer, to earn a stipend, to work in the Library of Congress and divisions, and to use the research collections of the library. So here are some of the outcomes that I'm going to go through very quickly. And I want to end by just giving you what I think are some of the positives of what came out of our reorganization. We considered it a success. 9 years later, we have our staff who know how to process materials, start to finish, acquire and catalog. And although we've lost staff, we've met and oftentimes exceeded our directorate targets. And despite all of the challenges, we've made time even now to use staff resources to learn bid frame. We've automated our processes more so that we can acquire, catalog, preserve, and provide access to more of the library's collections. And we've done this by enlisting the assistance of publishers to provide their Onyx data, by employing vendors and contractors to catalog for the library, and by displaying the library's collections and online exhibitions on our website at www.loc.gov. And by constantly continually training our staff in cataloging and processing electronic resources, we created efficiencies in our operations and increased production. So our work moves faster from the point of acquisitions to the time things are shelved in the library's repositories. We also created more space for our shelving by leasing additional repositories and by requesting funding from Congress to build modules at the library's repository in Fort Meade. And finally, we've increased the capability of our staff to deal with technology. We train them to acquire and catalog ebooks and serials and to capture collections through web archiving and preserve them in the library's dark archive. I'll conclude now then by saying that I hope I provided you with some insight into the work we do at LC and into how we got through our reorganization, and I hope this information is useful to you as you go out about planning for change at your organization. Thank you to Lex for inviting me to share my thoughts. I think the most important thing I've learned from this experience is that having a great team is the key to your being a success as a leader and as a manager.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Angela, for sharing examples of succession planning at the Library of Congress. Again, we do have some questions. I encourage everyone to submit additional questions and comments using the question box. Do you have any suggestions, Angela, as to how an organization, large or small, can begin the discussion about succession planning and how to build that planning into the organizational culture? And was succession planning already a part of the organizational culture of Library of Congress before this reorganization?
Well, we've always had many reorganizations within the Library of Congress, but as I mentioned before, when I began at the library, we were really flush with staff in that we had 5,500 employees. And so we would have small realignments. But as we began to lose our staff, as our staff went towards retirement, the average length of service is 25 years at the Library of Congress. I just celebrated my 35th year this year, and so that gives you an idea of how quickly we are losing staff and how difficult it is to recuperate those staff. So we began to change our culture in that we had to incorporate both succession planning and strategic planning more so into our into the way that we did we went about doing our everyday business. So I think that's so important. Many organizations may not think about strategic planning as a way in which to plot your way through a reorganization. But I think that by using that graph that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation, where we really sat down and spent time and included staff at all levels into the process, and we evaluated where we stood. We looked at our operations. We gathered together input. We spent time pulling together implementation teams. By doing all of that strategizing, we were able and involving not just people at the organization, but also looking outward, outside of the Library of Congress to get ideas. We were able to map our way through the reorganization. Now, the succession planning really came forth when we started losing lots and lots of different staff. So we realized at that time that we had to be more proactive about coming up with a strategy as to how we could get more congressional support to be able to hire more staff, especially in my directorate. We were meeting our targets for cataloging and acquisitions, and that didn't necessarily justify it, Congress being able to support us for getting additional staff. So we really had to work our way through ways in which we could make the argument to members of Congress that we were really in a position where we were in dire need of staff. And fortunately, in the last couple of years, we've been able to hire rank and file staff, and hopefully that support will continue for us.
Great. Yeah, that's so impressive that you are still able to meet your targets despite all that change in staffing. We have another question about how does your department handle authority control? Is it with in-house staff, or do you use an authority vendor, or a combination of both?
We have a combination of both. Our staff actually create authority records themselves. We've even done training in authority control for our new staff. They just recently got a training course in our training department. But for our shelf-ready vendors, they actually, some of them create authority control and others do not. In our overseas offices, we have taught them how to do authority control, and we've also taught them how to do the physical processing of materials as well as our vendors. We do, most recently, we began to contract out to contractors who actually come here into our divisions, and they've been doing the cataloging for the Library of Congress, and our staff actually create the authority records from the cataloging that they produce. So it's a mixture of both, LC doing the authority control and us teaching our vendors how to do authority control.
Great. Well, thank you, Angela. I think that was the last question that we have time for today. Any additional questions that we receive, we will go ahead and have the presenters answer those offline, and they'll be sent to all of the attendees today. So thanks again to all of our presenters for sharing such valuable examples of how to cultivate talent in our libraries. We're glad that all of you could be with us today. You will soon receive an email with a link to the recording, slides, and a short evaluation form. So please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. We value your comments, and they help the Elyssa Continuing Education Committee plan for future events. The email will also include a certificate of attendance and information on how to get a digital badge. Thanks to Joseph Nicholson and Iping Chin Gaffey from the Elyssa Continuing Education Committee and Megan Doherty from the Elyssa Office for technical support. The support they provide makes it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. We have several upcoming webinars. Please join us for the 4th and 5th sessions of this series, Re-envisioning Technical Services, Identifying Leadership and Talent Management Best Practices, which will be held on March 22nd and April 5th. And we also have upcoming webinars on Library of Congress subject headings and cataloging gender and RDA Rule 9.7. We also offer web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, and e-forums, which are 2-day email discussions. You'll find more information on the Elyssa website. We hope you will participate in other Elyssa continuing education offerings again in the future. This concludes our session. Thank you for joining us.